Not that you asked, but one of the things I do is I read several books at the same time, and I have grouped them into groupings just to have a brief chat about it. Here is Truman. Interesting. Joe Scarborough, the TV guy, former congressman. Truman is interesting because in the inaugural addresses, the State of the Union addresses, and the campaign speeches that I've read, which number in the hundreds, nobody mentions communism or threats from abroad. It is threats from within. Um, FDR famously said there's nothing to fear but fear itself, but most of the speeches contain attacks on internal enemies such as big business and such. Truman was the first to bring America out of its isolationism, mention communism, mention the threat, and almost single-handedly, because Europe couldn't do much, England was a spent force, and he confronted Stalin in the Cold War, and we, of course, eventually won. The other political book, James Baker, The Man Who Ran Washington. This involves the great Texas political machines. It's funny, I was reading a PhD on the creation of the Houston Astrodome in order to study the Toronto Sky Dome and BC Place and subsequent downtown domes. And it mentioned some historic characters such as Leon Jaworski, the judge who ended up playing a prominent role in Watergate, and George H.W. Bush and the Bakers and what have you. So you kind of get Washington. He was somebody for 30 years in Washington, and you also get some Texas politics. And the luckiest man, John McCain, whom I saw, you sometimes see interesting people walking through lobbies in Washington, and I saw him. And I'm smiling because the book begins with an account of his appearance on Saturday Night Live when his staffer said, "You cannot dress up in women's clothes the way Rudy Giuliani did." Staffer went out to the street for a smoke, came back in. John McCain was halfway into a pair of pantyhose. Staffer vetoed it. This is the famous sketch, if you've seen it, where he sings some Barbra Streisand songs. So he got into her Superman T-shirt, which was officially not not women's clothing. Okay, here are some serious points. Policy is not discussed much in Washington. I remember in the Davis years in Ontario, people would begin a conversation with, well, I don't want to get into policy, but policy was considered at least a double-edged sword, possibly dangerous, like a boomerang, can hit you in the face or elsewhere. And it was simply mechanics talking about how to get elected and govern. Interesting perspective. Also, you wonder why Americans really, really want a one-party system. They talk about reaching across the aisle and compromise and finding common ground and working together and hand in hand and hand in glove and all that stuff. When what we in the Westminster system do is face off two sword lengths and two outstretched arms away from the opposition, the opponent, whether it's the government or Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and they are loyal to the head of state, not the head of government, but the head of state, and they square off and debate. No such thing happens in America. There hasn't been a debate in Congress for maybe 100 years anyway. People stand up, intone their remarks to a neutral speaker, and sit down. There is no aisle to reach across. There is a little space in between desks, but it's not really an aisle the way we think of it. So they really want a one-party system. I'm not sure why. I will channel Christopher Hitchens to say the reason third parties like Ross Perot never get off the ground is it's only a one-party system. The second party has not actually gotten off the ground. Okay. Finally, the old channeling Christopher Hitchens again. The old chestnut that if we could just get more voters and more involvement in politics, we'd be so much better off and we'd get rid of all the bickering and debating and, corruption and what have you. Well, not so. Tammany Hall, Boss Tweed, not exactly ancient history, a little more than 100 years ago, of course, were the dead cat bounces of Tammany Hall. That featured huge turnouts. The expression clean sweep comes from women putting a broom on their balconies in lower Manhattan to signal that you should vote for all the same ticket, the Tammany Hall ticket. Clean sweep does not mean getting out the corruption or sweeping the political system clean. It means electing everybody from the machine, the Pendergast machine, which produced Truman. And then, of course, we also had Mayor Tom Daley in Chicago, and his Democratic machine. High voter turnout, high corruption. So there is the balderdash in politics. Happy reading.